many of us sit in prison feeling so bad about ourselves that we compartmentalize and we don't want to face it. But when we come to the gruesome reality that we need to change our lives, we want to know how. And the first thing I was taught is I have to allow myself to feel what I feel. And then I had to think of what my victims felt. And not only the immediate victim, but those who are subsequently close to them equally. So then I was introduced, like Joaquin, to empathy, putting myself in someone else's shoes so that I can really, and that was part of victims' impact, so that I can really understand what my victims felt. And I just want to say that role opens up so many different avenues. That role makes you become human again. And it's so many people in society today who lack empathy because everyone is so self-centered, that they don't care of what someone else may be going through or someone else feels. So I think in prison, when people go down that empathy path, you really do become a wonderful person. And if people only knew that, they would appreciate them when they come out. Because we have a new value system now. Empathy gives you a brand new value system.
Joaquin, can you elaborate on what you refer to when you say that Mon had a lot of integrity behind prison politics?
And then looking at his own particular case factors with like everything involved and him never violating, coming out of the whole coming to Mule Creek. And him and I talked about that a lot. Like that was something him and I unpacked a lot. It's like, hey, like I believe they put you on this yard. So either they can say, I told you so, he hadn't changed if you did something to somebody, or take the credit if you do change. Right? Oh, look, he's changed. Our policy is amazing. Look how great we are, right? So there was like, it was a no-lose situation for them. And just the way that he always carried himself on the yard. Like, it was so funny to see people show up on the yard and be like, oh, Mom's on the yard eating vegetarian burritos and doing burpees on a basketball court and going to group. Like, that was his thing. Because, like, it was like navigating two worlds. And I do a lot of contract work for other attorneys. And so a huge part of my work is like unpacking the politics around prison for lawyers, especially when they're up against opposition who understand it, but know that many people don't understand it. So what may look like one thing on a board report, right, or some internal memorandum looks completely different in context, right? Like I can't say anything because I got family still on the street. And so then for me, it is a matter of like looking at, all right, where did this write-up occur? At what institution? What year? So when I look at a C file and I got 15 write-ups from 2002 and the guy was in High Desert, oh, that makes complete sense in context. If you're white and Mexican in prison, you don't have the same privilege that a Black person does. Like the entirety of my prison career was not affiliated. I had that privilege, right? I could walk a yard and not be affiliated. If you're Hispanic or white, you don't have that option. So really unpacking that, that I think that's a part of my obligation to my peers, the people who I grew up with in prison. And I tell that to people all the time. Prison was my longest address. This is where I became an adult emotionally, was in prison. So I still am like tightly connected to the people who are still there, because I understand the journey. That's my hometown. I was born and raised, air quotes, in Los Angeles, but like I lived in prisons. I think when I look at what is our obligation when we are out here and we have acquired gatekeeping positions or positions of influence as credible messengers and professionals, that one of our responsibilities is to really unpack the context of prison, especially the politics around, identity politics, racial politics, as well as just regular criminal politics. Because change is not easy. Prison is not designed to facilitate wholesome, pro-social change. That is not what it was designed to do. But when we create these communities that hold space for that, it really is important for us who have transitioned out to figure out how we can continue to give back in a way that still supports those that are there, authentically and reasonably, not just this Pollyannic, I'm gonna support you no matter what you're doing. No, like I'm gonna support you as long as you're doing what you need to do to become a different person. So I think that is like our responsibility. How do we help other people become different? And I don't like to use good or bad because I realize it's so subjective. It's just how do we become different people? Taxpayers, people committed to creating no victims. That's the one thing I take from mine, right? Like I'm not gonna create any more victims. Like I picked that up and I ran with it because I realized that's what I wanted to do. And for many people it looks like a negative, like the inaction, but not creating victims isn't you have to be active around that. This is not a passive participation thing. You have to choose to be compassionate. You have to choose to be empathetic. You have to choose to be committed to making things right instead of being right. Like these things require deliberate and intentional action because society and our culture and our conditioning teaches us, aggression, this individualistic, sense of revenge and these punitive things that views that we take. So where the system creates victims, of victims and offenders. And so when we're on these yards and then we make and articulate these declarations around not creating more victims, that's not just us not acting. It is us engaging in empathetic dialogue. It is us engaging in pro-social mentorship on prison yards. It is us creating spaces and opportunities for people to engage in self-help. All these things, if you're committed to not creating victims, this is what this looks like. This is what indirect amends looks like. This is what community advocacy looks like. This is what grassroots movements in correctional settings look like. Like you have to say, I'm not going to create any more victims, like, and move towards that. So when I talk about Mon in that way, it is because, like, and he says it, he used to say it all the time, y'all can kill anything. It is not doing that. That is a demonstration of transformation. When you're in the midst of someone who may be a little more ignorant or immature or just where they are, and you, the clinical term, co-regulate your emotional content, right, and move forward in a way towards peaceful resolution, that's what it means to not create victims, right? Yeah, I know I can hit you in the mouth, but I'm doing something different. I want to understand where you at. I want to know why you're so committed to this conflict. Yeah, when Mom taught me a lot. Like he taught me a lot. He definitely was a major element of change, because when I decided to change, he was one of the people that supported that, with politics on the yard. The thing was, oh, that dude think he know everything. He worked for the police, right? Because I was a clerk, all these things, right? But Mom was very vocal. Yeah, but he worked for us too, right? He's the one making sure we have groups. He's the one making sure we have copies. So I think when we are committed to facilitating opportunities for change, that too is indirect amends, and that too is a part of not creating victims. So long-winded way of answering your question. I hope it kind of.
And Mon, what I loved about Mon, I remember all the time when I first met Mon, you was facilitating VAOP, Victim Awareness Offenders Program. And I remember one day Mon was like, I'm not a PC. I ain't over here because I got ran off the yard, right? And so I was looking at this dude like, man, you here. What you talking about? But then I started watching Mon, and Mon had he just had a demeanor to where you can tell he was no nonsense, but he wasn't really tripping. I remember coming up talking to him, and Mon would just give it to you raw and uncut. And knowing his history, for me as a youngster, I really listened to him. Like, okay, I see you, right? And he was very inspirational for me. And I remember when he got the date, and that's when I told myself, that's when I really started pushing and listening to Joaquin maybe more, because I was like, If they give him one, I'm getting one. That's without a doubt, right? So, but mom put in the work, and mom, I want to thank you also. You was very inspirational for the wisdom that you gave me and everything, just for being you.
But can I say something that's super important, Michelle? I don't know if you know this. Mom was surprised when he got a date. Like the look on his face, right? He's like, "Do you believe they gave me a date?" We're like, what?
Just want to wrap it up for this week. We can always resume next week.
Yeah, let's resume next week when Mon has a good connection and I can guilt him into sitting at a computer.
Okay.
And I don't know. I
Joaquin,
think Jordan might be busy.
that's all right.
He's a busy man.
He's we're all busy, but Joaquin, anytime you want to join in, please let us know. And why don't you could you tell the listeners, you mentioned helping attorneys, clients, and other inmates, and would you expand on that before we say farewell, please?
Sure. So I am the statewide lead for the Youth Peer Mentor Program, and we provide peer mentor training to system impacted individuals, foster care, teenagers, everything, transitional age youth. And right now we're deploying a program at Valley State Prison, and I'm actually going to Mill Creek next week. So we're probably going to start here. That's one of my jobs. My second job is Associate Director of Project Upstream, which is funded out of a Office of the State Public Defender's Grant, where we are providing indigent defense to individuals that may have had enhancements that have now are no longer legal. So we make sure that their petitions go to court. We provide indigent defense for people who qualify for Franklin hearings, felony murder, people whose immigration status may be impacted by a enhancement or conviction for marijuana. And so I do assessments, rehabilitative assessments for lawyers, interview inmates. We provide light touch case management, and we also do prison pre-entry. So if you're a transitional age youth and you're going to prison for the first time, we follow you through your entire prison commitment. We give you a rehabilitative plan. We provide case management, and we really want to make sure that the exile that is facilitated through prison is lessened, because we really are committed to the belief that just because you may have offended in the community doesn't mean you're no longer part of the community. And we just want to ensure that people, when they go off to prison, still know that the community cares about them and that we're here for them. So that's the work that we do through the Public Defenders Consortium.
And you mentioned one other thing that caught my attention, unpacking the prison politics issue for
attorneys,
particular attorneys, commissioners, or whatever. And how does that work? Because that is an issue for us all the time. The 115s are an issue. Commissioners are black and white. Commissioners are they're not, they don't think outside the box in terms of, well, you at high desert, and high desert officers are going to write you up every minute of the day if they can, or whatever the politics is surrounding those. So how does that work? And also, just these issues. I had this issue last week, and all the time, and Michelle will tell you as well. We need affirmative proof that you're no longer in a gang. We need you to debrief. We need you to go S&Y. Well, from a very basic understanding of it, you can't just say, I want to go S&Y because that's how I'm going to get paroled. That's not grounds by prison standards to go S&Y. And so just all of that that's probably a show and a half question. But if you could just touch on the basics there, that would be really great.
Okay, so if I'm doing a rehabilitative assessment, because I created this tool called Rehabilitation Competencies, and basically, I use the assessment, I review C files, and if I'm doing a Franklin hearing, it's important for me to unpack the context of the location of every write-up, right? So I give a historical perspective. I call in evidence from generally most times Inspector General reports about institutions and what prison politics looks like. I interview every inmate and then our offender, and I go down and I unpack where they were in time, like that point in time when that behavior was occurring, so that we can reconcile the new behavior and show and demonstrate change. So that's like for Franklin hearings. And then when recently, a lot of the work that I've been doing is around, there's one small provision with regards to the removing of enhancements from records, like getting those enhancements stricken. Is like if the DA can prove a current risk, to reoffend, right? And many times the DAs are going back in the C file to bring up old write-ups. And so for me, again, it's same process, unpacking context, but really giving the judge who's reviewing the case an understanding of what that prison was like, what that individual was like, right? And how that behavior is consistent with their developmental period and where they are, right? And really unpacking prison politics, because the DA is more than acutely aware of those circumstances, because when it's in their interest, they unpack it. And so many times they're not going to do that. And it's not something that, a defense attorney can say that the DA has a duty to disclose is the cultural and the political environment of a prison yard during a certain space and time, right? They don't have to say anything. So that's my job when I am working with an attorney, to really kind of comb through and do a forensic assessment of the C file. And then if it's a location that I know, then I have a personal knowledge of it. So then I can look at who did the write-up, right? And kind of unpack that in context. And then if we have issues around disclosure with those COs or that particular prison, that also goes in a report. So for me, it is really bridging the gap between being a community advocate with a high level of academic education and credibility, but also my 31 years of incarceration. So I think it has an additive effect where I can unpack in the context of theory, a particular type of behavior or environmental condition, and unpack it for the judge. Because I'm also certified expert witness now. So many times when I'm called to testify, it is really unpacking a report. And it's so amazing to be able to be rooted in those positions and not have a DA, befuddle me. Like, he can't challenge my experience. Like, it is what it is. And he can't challenge my academic record, because it is what it is. And so really being in a space to where I can bridge the gap between credible messaging, but also legitimate academic is super powerful for me. So, and people ask me all the time, like, why are you going to grad school? And so for me, it's for this reason, is my prison experience will get me in the room. My academic and professional experience will keep me in the room when we're talking about policy and policy change. And so being able to unpack that in a way that is credible, not only to my client, but also to the gatekeepers and the court, is super important. And I'm super grateful. So the work is always meaningful and purposeful. And I'm just grateful and blessed to be in a position to do that.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I look forward to seeing everybody next week.